Welcome to the Backstage Creative, the podcast that focuses on the people who work behind the scenes of theater. I am the host and creator of the show, Krista Copper. Happy August. I don't know where you live, but where I live, it's been ridiculously hot and miserable. And I don't think it'll come through on this recording, but the cicadas outside are crazy loud. It's like blaring. You walk outside the door and it's like this. You're hit in the face with this wall of cicada sound. So the dog days of summer are here. Wherever you are, I hope even if you don't have a wall of cicada sound hitting you out every time you walk outside your door, I hope you have some shows coming up on your calendar or things to look forward to. I don't have any like musicals or plays coming up, but I do have some experimental music shows coming up. I really like to do free improv and experimental music and work with composers on new work. So I have some free improv gigs coming up, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, other than that, just, I'm training for a 50-mile ultra marathon. Yikes, which will be at the end of October. So I've been training on that and just running and running and hoping that my calendar will start to fill up even more. Today is my conversation with Celia Kasberg. Celia is currently working on her MFA at Carnegie Mellon in, I'm pretty sure it's costume production. Celia and I worked together at Creed Repertory Theater, like a lot of my past podcast guests. Celia was one of my pod mates. Yeah, like a roommate, podmate type person. But yeah, Celia and I have a lot of good memories with Celia from Creed, and she was one of the inspirations for this podcast. Actually, just my conversations with her and the costume world, which I knew nothing about before working at CRT that summer. And so she really was one of the big influences for me starting the Backstage Creative. And so I'm so excited to finally get her on the show. Yeah, we talk about what it's like pursuing a degree during a pandemic, and talk about the structures of costume shops and some of the projects that she likes to work on. It's a good conversation, and I hope that you really enjoy it. Thanks for listening. If this is your first episode, or if you've listened to them all, I appreciate you listening so much. A lot of love goes into this podcast, and a lot of time, and editing takes forever. So I just so appreciate that people listen to this little project that I started almost 3 years ago now. And it's just me, just a one person show over here. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. With that being said, let's get to this conversation with Celia Kasberg. Awesome. So let's start with your background, where you're from, how you got into theater and costumes, and where you are now and what you're doing.
Okay, wow. Well, my name is Celia Kasberg. I am 24 years old. I'm from a very small town in Blanco. It's in Central Texas, for some perspective. And let's see, what were the other questions? How I got into costumes and theater? I was very close with my great-grandmother growing up, and she would make the most beautiful quilts and dolls and these little beautiful intricate dresses for the dolls that she would give me, and it always fascinated me so much. And I think from the age, I think it was at 7, she taught me the basics of like hand sewing, and from there my curiosity for the world of sewing kind of increased from there. And so it started out with sewing, and I got really interested in teaching myself how to crochet and knit, and more crafty things like like making friendship bracelets and making cute like stuffed animals for my friends. And yeah, from there it kind of grew. And I started theater in middle school as an arts elective. So my town and my school was so small. We had 3 choices. You could do either theater, band, or art. And I wasn't interested in painting and drawing, and I was not interested in playing instruments. I have no musical talent. So theater was my only option. So that's what I decided to pursue. And yeah, it kind of grew from there, but I didn't realize that I could do costumes and theater, and that the two were kind of married until much later in high school. when I started doing some costume design competitions, and I actually did really well. I kind of surprised myself. And my theater teacher sat me down, and I guess just a preference, I'm definitely one of those like cliches of like I'm a theater artist who was so heavily inspired by my high school theater teacher. She really pushed me in the direction I'm in today. And she sat me down and she said, you know, you're really good at this and you seem passionate, and if you want to do this, you definitely can and you should. And I guess that was kind of what led me to where I am today. So I guess long story short, that's how I got involved in costumes and theater. Yeah.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting, like, everyone in theater, it's like, I'm a musician and then I also do theater, and it's like people who do carpentry work, but then also theater, it's like you kind of start with your craft that you're interested first, and then like theater kind of comes along sometimes in random ways once you kind of figure out what you love to do. Why do you think that like I think of all the different uses that you can use, like costume making and kind of crafts work in other fields and industries? What do you think that it was about theater that attracted you?
I think the art of storytelling. And I think usually with other things you can do in the realm of fashion and sewing, you can do fashion design, you can, I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do, but I think theater is so specific and niche that every time you work on a production or film or TV, that each story is different and each character is different. And there's just so much you can do. I find that very fascinating and different. And I feel like that's what really intrigues me the most, that every single project I'm working on usually is different. And there's new people to work with and new performers to interact with, and everything is different. I don't really care to do the same thing day in and day out and just be on like repetition. I think like a lot of other artists, that's what fuels us creatively, is that our mind is always working and always wanting to try new things and work with new people. And so that's what I personally find most intriguing about theater.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I've ever been bored. I mean, like maybe like a few tech rehearsals where I've like sat in the pit for like 5 hours without having done anything. But yeah, just like generally, I've never thought, oh, work is boring when I'm on a production.
I know, yes, that is definitely a perk of our profession. No, I
Mhm.
agree. Absolutely.
Awesome. So where are you now, and what are you doing?
Currently, I am pursuing my MFA in costume production at Carnegie Mellon University. So currently, I'm residing in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So woohoo! Yeah. And I guess it's summer right now, the summer of 2021. So things are slowly opening back up from the pandemic. And currently, I'm collaborating with this wonderful woman. Her name is Rebecca Joy. She owns a small textile art company here in Pittsburgh. It's called Flux Benet. And it's spelled Flux with a space, and then Benet is Bene. And her company focuses on repurposing, that's the word I'm looking for, old textiles and garments, and making new things out of them. And so it's all eco-friendly, zero waste. And currently I'm working on repurposing old sweaters and making pieces for her fall collection. So things like hats and scarves and cowls. And it's been so much fun. I've never had the opportunity in the theater world to quite work on a project like this before, and also work on something that doesn't necessarily use my sewing skills, but more my crocheting and like textile artistry. And that's been so fascinating because that's always just been like a personal hobby of mine, not something I necessarily thought I could ever be paid for, and it's all like something crocheting has always been something I've made things for myself, or made gifts for my friends, or made like ornate wall hangings or art pieces. And so to make something that someone's going to buy and wear to keep themselves warm, that it just sounds, it's very rewarding to know that. And I'm very pleased with the work we're doing, and also the fact that collaborating with a small company that focuses on such an important message, like repurposing old garments and stuff, because usually, the fashion industry is one of the number one contributors to like landfills and waste. It's so unfortunate how many garments and stuff just go into a landfill each year because fashion ideals are always changing, and so people just throw away or just get rid of garments that aren't in style anymore. So I think it's a very important message, and it's a cause I'm all about. So that's what I've been working on.
How do you think the theater world could do better with, not contributing to so much waste, at least on the costume side of things?
On the costume side of things, I think some companies do a really good job. Most, any theater company is going to have a costume stock. So a costume studio or shop will make garments and then put them away in stock. So that way, when future shows come along, a designer or a manager can go and pull things for a show to use. So, I mean, some shows are just done over and over and over again. So it's nice to already have garments on the side ready for alterations, or that can already be done for a production. So you don't have to waste, time and money and resources building something new. And also, I think the costume industry is good at renting out costumes as well. So other costume shops and studios will rent from other companies. So I do think in some ways we are pretty good about being resourceful and reusing and being conscious about, what we can build versus what we can pull from stock and alter and add on to. But it still is, I mean, it's pretty sad. I think the theater industry is doing better and trying to move forward in a direction that is trying to be more eco-friendly. But I mean, it is sad to just think about how many garments and stuff just get thrown away and how, like, what doesn't get used, or it's just really sad to think about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. So I would love to hear what it's like pursuing a degree in the middle of a pandemic. I don't envy anyone who's in college right now. Like I think of like, gosh, like I mean, music, like performance, like so much, like we just need in-person stuff. And it's so much the same with theater. Like you need like to figure out audience reaction, and you need to be able to be in rooms with people to learn from them and collaborate. And so I can't imagine trying to earn a degree in like the performing arts at a time like this. So what has been your experience working on your master's in the middle of a pandemic?
Yes. Okay. I guess I should preface this by saying I think that, at least from my experience in school, the costume world has had it a lot easier than the other design and production emphasis. For example, when everybody went online for classes last year back in March, as far as what the costume world had to do at my school, I mean, we just took sewing machines home. Our school was very generous and let us take supplies. And at least in our field, a lot of it we can do from home. Like we can sew for home. We can, if we have a dress form, we can drape and pattern and kind of make do. But I just can't imagine how does a lighting designer do their work from home if they don't have the space to work in? Or how does even how does a scenic designer or the scene shop build their sets if they can't even be in the shop? So I feel, at least as far as costumes went, that maybe we had a little bit easier, but it was definitely interesting trying to make do and try and move everything into my apartment. One of my finals for last year was I decided to drape an Edwardian garment based off of a John Singer Sargent painting, turn of the century. So I had this very full, voluminous skirt, and my cutting table was too small. So I ended up moving my coffee table and trying to pad out my rug and put my really nice, like, 100% silk taffeta on the floor and cut to make my garment. And it was, I mean, it is a struggle. And you're right, theater is such a social, interactive art form. And I think when you take out that in-person element, there is something lacking. It's not, it was hard. It was hard on everyone. But I think at least from my experience in the costume world, we did have it easier than some of the other people in other departments. But I'm just so grateful. My professors were very open-minded and very new to this online experience, as I think the students were. We were just trying to make do with what we had. And luckily, we were able to do a lot of our own projects for home. Unfortunately, productions were canceled. But like I said, we were able to do so much of our classwork. And I still felt like I got so much out of my degree. And, luckily things now, I have a 3-year degree program. So I was able to experience my first year in person, full in classes, quote unquote, like the normal times. And then let's see, like the last half of my first year was spent almost all online. And then luckily my second year, things were opening back up slowly and our class sizes were so small, we were still able to have classes in person. But luckily this third year, my last year, things will return back to quote unquote the new normal. So I'm looking forward to what that will be. And I do think that the pandemic has definitely changed how we interact in the studio and how we interact with performers and how things are scheduled. And I do think that, there are some benefits to learning how to handle fittings and scheduling and costume building from an online perspective, because I do think a lot of people have learned how to use Zoom and have learned how to conduct themselves in an online presence. So I do think that that will kind of progress forward in the future, and we'll be able to schedule, I think, maybe fittings easier now, and people will be able to interact now, and we'll be able to talk to designers across the country. And I think it'll become a new staple. But I am still so excited things are returning back to normal, as I think the rest of the world is.
Yeah. So you talked about you thinking how the pandemic has changed some things. Can you give more other specific examples of how you think going forward, like what we've all had to learn during the pandemic will impact how productions are put up?
I haven't experienced this at school, but we've had some of my classmates and professors and I have had interviews with people in the industry over Zoom and online, and how other professionals were talking about ways to have measurements be done online, and how we don't have to maybe not necessarily rely on actors coming into the studio in person to have measurements done, which helps a lot. It was very experimental at CMU. I wasn't necessarily part of it, but hearing through the grapevine, hearing how actors had to put on costumes and like pose and be in front of the camera. So that way the studio ladies can like judge how a garment fits through a computer screen, which is definitely very new. So I do think if an actor can't be for fitting in person, if worse comes to worse, it can happen online and over Zoom. But I mean, obviously it is just always better to happen in person, to be able to like physically see and touch a garment and see how it fits a performer or an actor. If an actor can't be in person, if worse comes to worse, it happens online, and then we just move forward, and we don't have to wait for people to be late to fittings, which is always the worst. If you're an actor listening to this, please don't ever be late for your fittings. It is the absolute worst. Sorry, end of rant.
We all have actor rants. It's fine.
Yes, yeah.
What do you think is maybe the biggest thing that you've learned over your 2 years at Carnegie Mellon thus far?
I guess maybe it kind of ties into why I decided to pursue my MFA, but it definitely solidifies the reason. But I think it's important to take as many classes as you can. I mean, obviously don't tax like your mental and physical health, like trying to overdo it with classes, but being open to learning new things and meeting new people. I think that all ties into trying to make yourself the most marketable artist you can, that you can possibly be. Because I feel that once students graduate and they just want to be one thing, like a student just wants to be a designer, or a student just wants to be a cutter draper or a dresser, trying to do that right after graduation, it does happen, but a lot of times you'll find yourself doing other work to support, your end or your dream goal, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to accumulate, to become a jack of all trades and be able to make yourself the most marketable person. And I do find that taking so much variety of classes as far as costume production is concerned really does make me a more versatile artist. And I think that in turn influences what I do and the artist I want to be. That's the number one thing I've learned is important to make yourself as versatile as possible. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I find that in the music world too. Think about people who are either, like late high school looking into colleges, or late in their undergrad thinking about pursuing a graduate degree. What advice would you give to people who are looking for a college?
Okay. I wish someone would have told this to me when I was looking at undergrad, because I didn't really find myself thinking about this seriously until I was looking into a grad school. But looking at the professors that are going to be teaching you, especially in your field or emphasis, and look at where they've been, where they're coming from, what productions they work on, especially the connections that they have, because that's going to heavily influence how they teach and what goes into their curriculum and what kind of projects you'll be taking on. And I find that so important because I look at my graduate professors here at CMU, and they are beyond the most professional, versatile people I've ever met. They've done things on Broadway, they've done things for TV and film, they have all the connections in the world, and that so heavily pours into their coursework and their curriculum and how they structure their class. And I definitely do feel that in grad school, I've been getting the most out of my educational career that I could definitely ask for. Like, I'm getting my money's worth, I guess, let's say. But that's something that didn't really occur to me when I was looking at undergraduate schools, because in undergrad, I was thinking, well, coming from Texas, I didn't want to move. I kind of wanted to be out of state, but I didn't want to be too far out of state. And so a really good school I was considering and that I ended up deciding to go to was Oklahoma City University. That's where I got my undergraduate degree. And it was that perfect balance of being out of state, but not too far away from home, and, feeling comfortable and, feeling independent. But I feel like that weighed in too heavily into that decision, because I guess another piece of advice that I could give is maybe consider going to school where you would potentially want to work at. So I guess going back to going to school in Oklahoma City, the arts aren't really supportive there. Like, there is an art scene, but it's not as supportive as if someone would have gone to LA or NYC, or maybe Chicago, like places where the arts are much more supportive. That is a thing to consider as well, because that can also determine job opportunities once you do graduate. I mean, there's so many things to keep in mind, like also money and, location. And some people decide to go to school somewhere, I feel, because, no, it's too cold up there. Or I don't like the climate, or, I don't know. I can't imagine myself being there. But I really think looking into the professors that are teaching and what connections they can offer is probably number one thing to consider, but also the location as well. Because again, that's where you could be getting a lot of your job opportunities from. So I think those are the two pieces of advice I would give if I could talk to a younger person, or if I could talk to my younger self. Yeah.
Oh, if I could talk to my younger self. Yikes.
I would
That
have
would be
so
so
many
nice.
things to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the location thing is so important. I've moved to different cities and, just kind of packed up and moved. And it's really hard to kind of break into a new scene if you didn't go to school there. I found it in almost every place I've
Absolutely.
lived. Like, people are much more willing to give you a job if you went to school there, or like have some kind of connection to like the university that's in town. And so yeah, I think that's,
No, absolutely.
especially if you're looking at like a grad level degree, like, yeah, that figuring out the location, I think is the way to do it.
Yes, I think going back to like finding connections and meeting people, I think this is from my own personal experience, but I found that my undergraduate degree really heavily focused on, learning, I guess, the basics, for lack of a better term, but learning how the theater world works and learning how all the design elements like lighting and scenic and stage managed sound design, how it all like meshes and comes together in that big old melting pot, and you learn the basics and you learn the like fundamentals of design or production or whatever you're studying. But then I found personally that grad school, you really refine upon those things. And one thing I particularly love about grad school is that I've only had to focus on what I wanted to pursue, which is costume production. All my classes are costume production. I cannot tell you how scary it was for a little baby costume Celia trying to learn how to use all the big scary scenic tools in the scene shop and learn how to be a stern stage manager in my management. Like, it was just, personally, it was not my cup of tea. I think it's important to learn those things to become a well balanced and versatile artist. But I'm a costume girl. I just want to make pretty things. And that's what I've come to grad school to do. And not only that, but also to really, make connections, get to know people, because I know it's been said on this podcast before. I listened to all the episodes, but truly, making connections, because it's such a small world. You're going to run into everyone and everyone over and over again. So from my personal experience, grad school has really been refining and growing upon what I've already learned and fine tuning and focusing what I want to be as an artist and what kind of art I want to produce and where I see myself going and making those connections and then really blossoming, for lack of a better term, from there. So yeah.
Do you find that most people in costume world have their masters, or like is that pretty common?
Yes and no. I feel that, strangely enough, I feel like I met a lot of people who undergrad they didn't do costumes, and then they go get their graduate degree in costume designer production. But that's just from my personal experience. I feel like it can be either or. A lot of people get more, I guess, what am I trying to say? I feel that a lot of artists don't flourish in school as well, and they get most of their experience and grow as an artist from just being out in the real world and working on productions and learning as they're going along. Me personally, that was not the case. I found that I need a structured classroom setting. I need someone, in person to show me how things go and how to create what what I'm trying to do, and getting and receiving feedback. And that's where I found I grow and learn and progress as, not only a person, but an artist. But a lot of people in our industry, I feel like, are the exact opposite, which is completely fair and respectable. But I do find it to be either or in the costume world. You don't need your master's, but I found that I needed my master's because my undergraduate degree wasn't, it was more design heavy, had more of a design emphasis. And in my personal opinion, I think to be a better artist, I felt that I needed to learn more about the production side and element of things. Because I think those two go heavy hand in hand. I think that you can be a designer and draw the most pretty of pictures that make people's eyes like open and jaws drop. But I think that if you aren't effectively able to communicate design wise what you want, and you don't know how a garment or crafts piece needs to be constructed, then it just makes it much more harder on your production team. I mean, that is the point of your production team, is to help you figure out how those things are supposed to be created. But it just makes the whole process much smoother if you as a designer or a craftsperson can communicate what you want built effectively, and you know how the pieces go together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I decided to go to get a master's because I was just like, I am not ready. Like am not ready to like try to make this a living yet. Like I need some more time just to grow up and refine like my artistic vision, and like I just needed some time to kind of mature, like my playing to mature a little bit. But
Yes, yeah.
school is a nice safe bubble. I love it.
No, absolutely. And I guess going back to your question about learning during the pandemic, it definitely has been a huge safety net or a big safety bubble, because I mean, the entertainment industry got hit the hardest during the pandemic, and everything was shut down, and it just, it hurt my heart so much to see my friends and cohorts and colleagues like struggle to find work. But I mean, I guess I was grateful because I was in school, because yes, my heart was hurting for my industry kind of falling apart during the pandemic, but I was still in the safety net, and I felt confident because I was still growing and learning as an artist. And just like what you said, the safety net, I guess, does play a lot into it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. So this is one of my new favorite questions that I kind of stumbled upon, and I've been asking it to like everyone because I just like it. So you being from Texas, how do you think being from Texas has influenced either the art that you make or how you conduct yourself, or how has growing up in Texas influenced what you've become?
So I guess, as I said before, I guess to preface it, I grew up in a really small town. My town was so small that my theater teacher taught both theater and English at a middle school and high school level. So she would travel between schools every day and try to wrangle up a whole bunch of rowdy kids and try to teach them the world of performing arts and English and proper grammar. And she was just an incredible woman. Her name was Mrs. Arlett. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here today. So I guess when I think about how Texas has influenced me as an artist and perhaps put me where I am today, I think about Miss Arlett and how strong of a woman she was, and how, I mean, growing up in a small town in Texas in the South, maybe generally speaking, this doesn't only happen in the South. It's a whole issue in the US as a whole, but the arts are never supported like sports or math and science are. And, it's all about what brings in money. And that's football. That's, it's all about sports. And it's really sad to see arts pushed to the side. And so I saw my theater teacher struggle with just a couple $100 budget, trying to round up a bunch of rowdy kids who were just taking theater as an elective and didn't even care about it. And watching her sit kids down and say, no, you're going to learn how to appreciate this. This is an important part of our society, and art's important. And this is something you should know. And watching her create and do what she did with everything stacked against her was so inspirational. And I think about, I guess you would call it humble beginnings. It sounds so silly, but I like to think of myself as like a little tiny seed and having an inspirational, strong, independent Texas woman like my theater teacher, Miss Arlett, holding a pitcher of water and making sure I was watered daily and getting, natural sunlight and being that, beautiful, inspirational person for me and helping me grow into the artist I am. And that watching her be resourceful and teaching me how to be resourceful, I feel like really impacts what I do now, because now that I go to a really nice grad school where the arts are heavily supported and I have, we have all the money in the world, not all the money, that's a huge exaggeration, but we have, large budgets and we have resources at our fingertips to use to create beautiful productions. It really makes me appreciate where I came from and what I had. And I think about that a lot. And I think, so the state of Texas doesn't necessarily influence me, but the people from Texas, that one person from Texas. And that was very influential, I think, into who I am today. And I like to think that maybe, hopefully, as I climb, the ladder of success, for lack of a better term, that, it just makes me appreciate more what I have and like what I can work with. And that'll help influence and help me create better art. But I will always think about high school Celia sitting in class with Miss Arlett and trying to figure out what we're going to do for the next production, or like my next, costume project or design, or getting ready for my next design competition. And just, yeah, that's what I think about. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Who is it that said I'm standing on the shoulders of greatness? That's some famous quote by someone. But yeah, like I think we're all like standing on the shoulders of someone,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You can take this any way you want. Do you have like a favorite material to work with, or a favorite like thing to make, like pants? I don't know. I don't know much about the costume world, but like a favorite.
That's a good question. Don't worry. My favorite thing to work with, it could just be because I've been working with Rebecca so much on all these lovely crocheting projects. But crocheting is a very big passion of mine. And there's something really fascinating about starting from absolutely nothing and then buying a skein of yarn and then crocheting or knitting or weaving a garment that just takes shape, and you get to control where it sounds so cheesy. You get to control where it goes, and it's just not its destiny. That's way too cheesy, but you get to control that. It's not the same as just like going to the fabric store and buying, some yardage and draping and doing, it's starting from nothing and creating something. And I find that really fascinating. And that doesn't necessarily just mean like crocheting. It could just mean like ripping something apart and then making something new of it. Or I think any project, this might sound very vague, but any project where you just start from absolutely zero and then just go from the ground up, I really find, because you can control the color and the texture and the density and what kind of stitches or techniques you use, and those are the kind of projects I particularly enjoy. Yeah.
Do you get to do a lot of crocheting in theater world?
A little bit, not too much though. A lot of things are. I mean, crocheting it does take time. I like it is like I said, it's so fun to create something from scratch and work as you go. But unfortunately, the downside is that it does take a lot of time. And in the theater industry, time is money, so it is effectively easier in some cases just to go buy something that's already been made, or yeah, go in another direction entirely. But there have been a couple of projects where I've been able to crochet like a couple little pieces here and there, and it's definitely those have been my favorite, I must say.
My mom is like a crafty type person, and she, when I was in high school or maybe middle school, tried to teach me how to sew because she just wanted so bad, for her daughters to share the interest that she had. And I sewed like 2 pillows, and I was like, I'm done. I can't. I
That's
can't do
fair.
this.
It's not for everyone. It is not for everyone. Absolutely.
I admire people who have the patience to sit with a sewing machine, and do like super small, intricate work, because I can't.
Yeah. I appreciate what you do. I guess on the flip side of that coin, my dad is a musician. My sister and my brother were both in band and very musically inclined. And, you know, he bought me a guitar and he's like, "Hey, I want to teach you how to play this." And it did not work out. It was not my niche. It was not my thing. So I appreciate what you do. Talk about making something from nothing. You pluck strings and you do what you do and you create sound out of no. I just think that's very fascinating. So I'll say the same about you, Krista. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's what I love about theater. Like, there's just so many, just like every job except for mine. I'm like, I can't, nope, can't do that. Like, so, yeah, I love
I'll
it.
say the same thing I'll say the same thing about any of the other fields. There's no in my lighting design and scenic design class, I've struggled so much. I'm like, I don't even know how people do this. But then again, just like how we're talking about now, other people look at what we do and like, there's no way. So that's what I do find that really special, is that we, you know, as artisans, we pursue what we want to do, and it's so collaborative, and we all come together and we all produce like a storytelling masterpiece. And that's what I truly love about this profession. It's like magic, it is very magical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. So true. Like, I don't get what everyone in the costume shop does. Like, there's all of these like titles of what people do. Can you explain to me like all of the different roles and what they do?
Okay, I will try my best. In a costume studio, you do have a structure, a pyramid, for a lack of a better term. And I guess at the top of the pyramid, you have your studio manager or your shop manager, studio/shop. I'll use them interchangeably, I guess, while I'm describing this. So you have your manager, and your manager is the person who will usually be in charge of like financial things, so like budgeting, but also taking in charge of like the creative process and how a designer effectively communicates with the shop. And the manager, quote unquote, I mean, obviously they manage how the garments are being produced and, the supplies and resources that need to be ordered. And they're just, the overseers of how a production moves through the shop. And their job is to make sure it runs through the shop smoothly. So very broadly speaking, I guess that's what a manager would do. And probably right up against the manager on that pyramid, you would have the designer for the show. So the costume designer, in the sense, their job is to talk with the director or the producers about, the vision for the TV show, the movie, the theater show that they're trying to produce, and collaborate with other designers to come up with a good solid concept to design costumes for, and communicate with the performers and understand how the costumes are being used in the storytelling process. And from there, they would, design or render what their vision is and communicate that to the rest of the studio, who would be in charge more or less of building or finding costumes for the production. So I guess moving down the pyramid, you would have people like your cutter draper. Your cutter draper is the person who would communicate with the designer or maybe an assistant designer about how a garment needs to look, what fabric type should be used, and effectively will drape or pattern what that garment will need to be. And that cutter draper will typically be sitting in for fittings to fit the actor or performer in those garments and pieces. So their job is to make sure that the fit is good, that it effectively communicates what the costume designer wants to be on stage, and make sure that that garment from then on out can be passed on to a first hand who is essentially, I guess, more or less an assistant to the cutter draper. Sometimes it'll just be called a cutter. Usually they are the person to take the pattern pieces and cut the fabric to make sure you have all the pieces, and then pass that down to a stitcher or seamstress. And then their job as a stitcher or seamstress is to assemble the garment together. Woo! So I guess that's kind of the ladder you would go down. And then once a garment has been assembled and put together, you will have the actor come in for another fitting, do your alterations, and then fingers crossed that garment will be ready for dress rehearsal. But you have a lot of other people in between there as well. For example, sometimes you'll have generally a crafts artisan, or that's someone who does all the crafty things, like makes hats or gets the correct shoes for the performer, or makes jewelry pieces or makes armor. Essentially, a crafts artisan will make garments and pieces that aren't necessarily the main garment on the body, if that makes sense. Sometimes you'll only have people who are just like the milliner, the person who makes the hats. Or you'll have a dyer, a person who will take the garment or the fabric needed to make the garment and dye to be the correct shade or the correct color for that fits the rendering or the designer's vision for the show. You also have dressers as well that fall into the pyramid scheme, and the dressers will take the garments that have been made or altered or pulled or rented, and from there, the dressers will make sure that they're prepped and ready for shows, that they get laundered correctly. And the fun part about being a dresser, this is what I enjoy, is they'll also help out with quick changes during the show. So the dressers essentially will take the garments that have been made in the studio or shop and move them in for the real deal, for the show to be performed in, or the TV or the movie or whatever. Yes, I hope that's all the people. I mean, there are a whole lot of other, sometimes the bigger studio gets, you'll have people who are like shoppers who all they do is just shop for garments or pieces or things. And that's their only job, is the designer will tell them, oh, I need this, or I need this type of fabric, or I need you to buy these shoes. And they'll go out and they go get that. I find that usually a bigger shop gets, you'll have like more like niche things and people to do those really like tiny refined things. But yeah, I hope I didn't leave anyone out. But generally speaking, I think that's the general structure of a costume shop. And, stitchers will do things like alter clothing, and sometimes they'll help sit in on fittings. And then you also have tailors as well, who all they do is just, make more or less quote unquote tailored garments, or do more like menswear for productions or shows. And yeah, I think that just about covers it.
Do you have a favorite role to fill in that pyramid?
Yes, in the pyramid or the structure, I love being a crafts artist, and that's what I hope to pursue fully. I mean, I do enjoy, cutting and draping and patterning and tailoring to some degree, but I find where my imagination and creativity really shows is when I get to do like the more little nuanced pieces. Like I really enjoy leather working. I love textile work. I love making jewelry, mask making. I enjoy it all. So that's where I hope one day I professionally get to fulfill that aspect of the pyramid. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that I think a lot of people get stressed about, but I kind of like it. So I'm going to ask it. 3 skills needed for your job. What would they be?
The first thing I would think is knowing how to be resourceful, because oftentimes, the theater world at some companies, depending on where you work at, you don't always have the biggest budget or schedule to work with. So I think that being resourceful is number one, because, sometimes I'll be honest, you're balling on a budget. And so you need to learn how to work with some resources and materials that are inexpensive, but learn how to make them look expensive and look really nice for a stage setting. So I think being a costume artisan, that really plays hand in hand with what we do, because again, not all the time you have the budget, or you're not available to go fly out to New York City for the weekend and go to the fashion district and get like the most finest, fabrics and materials to use to make what you need to make. So I think being resourceful and knowing how to work with a lot of different materials is important. And I also find it probably goes hand in hand with that bit. Having good time management skills is also important, because theater and the entertainment industry as a whole works on a very strict schedule. And I said this earlier in the podcast, I'm going to say it again. When actors are late to their fittings, it's the absolute worst thing in the world to happen in the costume world. So, but the whole structure of a costume shop revolves around having things ready for design meetings, having things ready for first dress rehearsal, having resources and materials in on time to begin the build, having things and alterations and things pulled, done, and ready for before opening night. Obviously, everything revolves around a schedule. They're all gears and the magical theatrical clock that we all run our lives on. And when one of those gears is not working correctly, then the rest of the clock is kind of freaking out. So that's how, in my brain, I feel like it works. So having good time management skills, I think, is very important in the costume world. And last but not least, being personable, being a really fun person to work with, because I can't tell you how many costume studios or shops I've worked in that they're always in a basement. They're always in a weird, sketchy warehouse. They're always, if you're working on film or TV set, you're always working outside and you're in the worst weather conditions imaginable. And that can really suck. But what makes those working experiences great is that you have the best people to work with. So I think being personable and being fun to work with is extremely important, because that can really make or break a costume studio or shop dynamic. And having like one negative Nancy come in day out and, not contribute anything, be super negative, just be super sour, that can really ruin a workspace environment. So I think being able to laugh at yourself, being personable, being fun, that is the number one thing that I think people in our world look for. Because we are such a tight-knit community, and you work with the same people day in and day out, and theater can be a very stressful, profession. So being able to be a fun person to work with is definitely, in my opinion, the top three skills that you should have if you're wanting to work in the industry. So
yeah, that being personable one, it's such a pain in the butt. Like, like I just want to, like sometimes I'm like just so deeply, deeply, deeply introverted, and sometimes I just want like my skill to be enough, but it's not. Like you can't just get by on your skill. Like you need that personal, those social skills.
I do think that's true, because theater is such it's a social world to work in. You're working with actors, you're working with people who love to talk and be seen and be heard, and it's important to know how to interact with those people and be able to work with a variety of people too, because theater's truly, a diverse melting pot. And that I love that about this profession. But going back to what you said, sometimes it can be stressful to work with a variety of people like that and be able to know who you're talking with and how to present yourself, and come across as professional, but also personable as well, I guess, if I'm going to end my tangent.
Great. This has been so fun, Celia. So I have one final question that I like to ask everyone, and that is, what are you excited about right now?
Oh my gosh, what am I excited about right now? I'm excited. I'm going to be starting my last year of grad school, and all my life I've been in school. So, ever since I was 5. So by the time I'll graduate, I will be 25. So I'll spend the last 20 years in school. So I've been fortunate in between years of school. I've been able to work at summer stocks and do side gigs and to keep myself employed in that way. But I'll be graduating, and I'll be a full-fledged on adult. And it's scary to think about, but I'm also really excited. I can't wait to, I think I said it before earlier, but I'm that little tiny seed, and I hope I truly get to blossom. It sounds so corny. I know it does, but I really hope I get to blossom and become the best artist I can be. And it's a year away from now, but I'm looking to where this next year takes me, and I'm excited to start that next chapter in my life. So, yeah.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Carly Wagner.